Welcome to the first Boston Mayoral Candidates Forum of the 21st century. The BSA is a professional organization of 3,500 architects and allied professional members. And through our programs and activities, we are committed to making our cities more beautiful, our neighborhoods and our communities stronger, and creating better places for people to live, work, and recreate. The BSA is also an important partner to the City of Boston. Just this year, we have hosted a summit with the Boston Public Health Commission exploring the way to design public spaces to combat heart disease and obesity. We hosted a month-long series of events with the Landmarks Commission on the social, economic, and environmental benefits of historic preservation. We supported the Building Energy Use Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance recently passed, and now we are advising the Mayor's Green Ribbon Commission on how Boston's buildings can resist the effects of climate change. If you just look around today, you can see it's been a great 20 years for the City of Boston. And though we can't expect every administration to last 20 years, still, we believe the questions for Boston for the next 20 years need to be asked today. What happens to the city when we introduce hundreds of new housing units in downtown? Can we lead the region in finding sustainable solutions to transportation equity and housing affordability? And how can the city resist the effects of sea level rise and storm surge? These are complicated questions. But we believe that the power of what we do, design, is immeasurably increased when used in partnership with enlightened and progressive public policy. That's how we address the issues of the next 20 years. And we, the Boston Society of Architects, are committed to perpetuating our progressive collaboration with the next administration of the city so we can work together to ensure the prosperity of the city we all love. Thank you. And now, to introduce the candidates and moderate the forum, the editor of ArchitectureBoston magazine and renowned Boston Globe columnist, Renée Loth. Renowned.
I think I'll put this over here. All right. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for coming to the new season of the show, 8 is Enough. I would thank you all for coming. It's going to be a terrific morning. I would only add to that nice introduction of Mike's. Look at this, it's movable. I would only add to that nice introduction that in addition to being the moderator this morning, I am a City of Boston voter, Ward 22, Precinct 13. And so like many voters, I think in the city this year, I am really in need of some substantive issues discussion to help inform my choices in the fall. This is, as you know, a historic opportunity, the first time in 20 years that we've had this kind of open seat, this kind of open race, and there are many new faces. So I really hope that the candidates will enter this forum in the spirit of informing the voters and enlightening them as to your positions on the issues with as much specificity as possible. So I'd like to introduce the candidates. Each of you has a program on your seats with longer biographical information about each candidate, and so of course you can always go to their websites and find out more. So I am really very quickly going to just identify them here so that we can get to the meat of the program. Overall, we've got 90 minutes, so we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm just going to rush right through the introductions at this point. And I'm hoping you'll just please hold your applause until I've gone all the way down the line, okay? This is in alphabetical order. At-large City Councilor Felix Arroyo of Jamaica Plain, hello. John Barros, Director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative of Dorchester. At-large City Councilor John Connolly of Roslindale. District City Councilor Robert Consalvo of Hyde Park. Charlotte Goler-Ritchie, who is Senior Vice President at Youth Build USA of Dorchester. District City Councilor Mike Ross, he lives in Mission Hill. Bill Walzak, Vice President of Shawmut Design and Construction, he lives in Savin Hill. and State Representative Marty Walsh of Dorchester. Thank you so much and welcome. I'm going to briefly go over the... Oh, hi. Counselor, how are you? Please have a seat. We'll have you speak later. Thank you. I'd like to briefly go over the format this morning. In lieu of an opening statement, we have asked each of the candidates to prepare an answer to a question that they were all given in advance, all the same question posed by the BSA. Candidates will have 3 minutes to answer, but you get extra points if you can bring it in under 2, okay? Tyler here in the front row will be alerting the candidates when you have 60 seconds left, when you have 30 seconds left, and when you hit stop, in which time I will ring the bell. I've always wanted a bell, you know. Ring the bell indicating that your time is up. That's the first part of the program. In the second part, things are a little bit different. We're going to mix it up. We won't necessarily go in order. Each of the candidates will be asked a question that they did not see in advance that we've written up. There are 8 candidates. There'll be 8 different questions. If I think there's time, or if I think there's a need for a deeper discussion, I may, call on individual other candidates, or try to ask follow-ups, or ask for a show of hands, or try to get some more conversation going. But we really want to try to, give the candidates airtime, and so we may circle back after everybody gets a chance. We will see how it goes. And after the forum, there will be a yummy reception in the BSA Space gallery. I hope people have a chance to take a look at the gallery. It's really great, a new public space in the city, and you're all invited to that forum. Okay. Since I introduced the candidates in alphabetical order, I thought to mix it up, we would get the answers to the first question in reverse alphabetical order. So we'll be starting with Representative Walsh, whom I can't see, so I'm just going to step out here.
I'm down here.
How you doing? This is the question, the opening question that all candidates have been given. Through the planning and design of buildings, architects shape the public and private places in which we work and live. Architects share a deep concern that the places we work, live, and play should be safe, healthy, and sustainable. So with respect to the issues in this campaign, what are your priorities involving development, sustaining the environment, transportation, housing, and growth? And what actions will you take in these areas as mayor that will enhance the quality of life for the people of the city?
Thank you, Renee, first of all. And seeing that you live in Ward 20, I'd like to ask for your vote for mayor, just to start the day off. I mean, assuming Ward 22.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear this?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'd also like to thank the BSA for hosting today. This is exciting for all of us. This is the first of 300 debates that we're going to have over the course of the next few months. And I'd like to recognize my colleague from the State House, Representative Chris Walsh, who's here with us as well today in the front row.
And who's an architect, yes?
Who is an architect as well. And we need his help on Beacon Hill once in a while as far as an architect goes. Now, I don't know if Councilor Yancey, I don't know if he wants to be part of the forum.
He's going to be having an opportunity to speak later. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. This is a very important issue for the future of our city as far as what all of you do. So I want to thank you for being here this morning and taking the time out of your schedule to be here as far as moving Boston forward. I'd like to begin by saying you can't have an architectural vision that's different from a policy vision. That's the first thing I think is important for us to realize. In Boston, we need bold architecture. We can't be afraid of heights. Too often when we're talking about projects, we're concerned about what the height is, and there's so much discussion around it. I think we also need to look at multi-use buildings in order to encourage sustainable growth and sustainability. That's something that we've done in Dorchester and many neighborhoods in the city of Boston where we've had mixed-use buildings, and I think they've worked well. We need to have clear goals and clear guidelines. And forever, we've been talking about streamlining the permitting process. And I think that that's a concern that a lot of us do have regarding building buildings in Boston, or even building buildings in communities. We have too much red tape that we need to go to, and I think we have to do more to shorten that process. We certainly need clear transparency in our city. Also, when it comes to the environment, we need geothermal construction. We need green space, job training for sustainable jobs. We also need to have public education on sustainability. That's an important piece that oftentimes we leave out. We also need to continue our LEED certified, our buildings, particularly for new construction. We need to make sure that we're prepared for the 21st century and that our city is prepared for the 21st century. Those are some of the answers to the first question that we have. And today is really about, I think for me, is to be able to explain what my vision for the city of Boston is. And my vision is bold, and my vision is aggressive. And 30 seconds, okay, sorry. And I want to thank you.
Thank you. I didn't even have to ring the bell. Mr. Walzak, thank you.
Hi.
Turn it on.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
Hi, my name is Bill Walzak, candidate from Dorchester. First of all, let me answer the question by saying that that the built environment is a major part, if not the major part, of the very identity of the city, of every city, and therefore it has to be done extraordinarily well. And we haven't always done it extraordinarily well, and sometimes we don't do it extraordinarily well even today. So let me establish, though, that I am a pro-growth candidate. I believe in growth because the city is growing, and we need to be able to meet the commercial, residential, and recreational needs of a growing city. We're probably going to be up towards 650,000 people in the near future. So I will support continued development. But we have to deal with some issues in the city, and part of it is the opaqueness that our development process has in the city of Boston. The whole issue, what does BRA do? What does the Department of Neighborhood Development do? Why does it take so long to get a porch put on your house? Those issues, the ISD issues. And I think especially the lack of transparency around how these processes happen. We got to deal with that stuff. Beyond that, though, it's the lack of planning, in my view, that's the major problem in the city of Boston. We have a development agency that doesn't really do planning as nearly as much as it needs to. As mayor, I will implement an assessment on how development in our city functions, how we need to restructure our development agencies to work together and maximize planning and community involvement. We need to democratize the process for planning in our city, and there are software programs that can allow us to do that in a much more effective way than the whole issue of bringing everybody together and figuring out how to do it on a regular basis. We need to be able to democratize that. I will establish a citywide committee of planners, architects, community, and business representatives to guide the city's planning process. The BRA and DND will be directed to develop an agenda and a timeline for planning efforts throughout the city, starting with the developable areas of the city. We really need to start trusting our residents and our businesses to be able to work together. This planning process needs to be broadened and democratized, and we need to be able to come up with master plans in all of the developable parcels, areas of the city, where we can actually implement things. Housing is a huge issue. And we need, it's a big crisis. I mean, I don't go to a meeting where I don't hear about the price of housing and how ridiculous it is. So we need to be able to develop more housing, and we need to really think about transit-oriented development. I can tell you that I will be a big promoter for the city of Boston and a big regional promoter for the region of Boston. And that's what you can expect from a Walzak administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor Ross.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Ross, and great to be here with you. So I would start with, when it comes with housing and growth, I would start with the principles of predictability, growth, and growth for all. So we have a lot of people who want to live in this city. We have students who are graduating from colleges that want to afford to stay here. We have empty nesters who are looking to move here. We have lifelong Bostonians who want to continue to make the only city they've known home their home. We have the world of citizens of the world who want to just come to Boston because they love our city. We can't all continue to live in this city at a rate that we can afford to live in this city without building and without a more aggressive plan to build in this city, and not just build luxury housing, but working class housing too. To do that, we have to plan. One of the neighborhoods I represent is the Fenway. And you all know Boylston Street used to be a street of parking lots and gas stations and fast food restaurants. And today, with our community coming together and having planned that area, we all know what's happened there. a predictable set of zoning guidelines that allowed Steve Samuels and the Abbey Group and others to build and to develop and create hundreds of units of housing and affordable housing, and the Fenway Community Health Center. 2 million square feet of development, $2 billion invested. That's what we need to do across our city. We have spaces across this city that are perfect for building, and not just here in downtown, but throughout our neighborhoods. The guys who did Ashmont in Dorchester are here. I mean, there are opportunities throughout our city to build, to allow for the amenities that people want. When I go across the city and I talk to people, they want the amenities that we all want. Community serving banks, spaces to gather, like restaurants, supermarkets. These are the things that people want, and these are the things that come with development. Right here on the waterfront, there are 17 acres of prime developable space. Now, our city's waiting for a shipbuilder to arrive. Here in 2013, a shipbuilder to build on those 17 acres. Now, I would love to see some maritime uses, but we can't wait for that development to occur because there is such demand. And many of you go to open houses and you see 40 people showing up, all cash offers, no contingencies. People are now waiving the inspections. We have a huge opportunity to build in this city. And when it comes to building affordably, the principle of inclusionary zoning, that is a principle. That should not be negotiated away by our BRA. I believe that the affordable units, the working class units, have to be moved to the Department of Neighborhood Development, and they, through a transparent process, should manage that process, not this opaque black box that occurs with the BRA. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gully-Ritchie.
Good morning, everyone. Pleased to be here. Charlotte Gulli-Ritchie, and I'm happy to be here with these fine candidates, people that I've worked with in government for many years, and many of you in the audience. And it's terrific to be here. I was before I got here, I was trying to figure out if I could find the award that I received from the Boston Society of Architects years ago. But you all recognized my work at the city, and I'm happy to be back. So there is, you know a little bit about my track record, having worked at Mass Housing, which we used to refer to as Mass Housing Finance Agency at the time, as a state rep and chair of the Housing Urban Development Committee, working as chief of housing for the city of Boston, and then with the governor, and also most recently with Youth Build USA. And throughout those opportunities that I've had to lead in various capacities, I have addressed housing in all sorts of ways, whether we're talking about construction, rehabilitation of existing units, affordability, the extension of affordability over time, which would be part of preservation, the preservation of structures, the preservation of affordability, as I just mentioned, and then the assorted amenities that accompany housing. Housing alone does not a neighborhood make. You need to have all of the things like parks and businesses and so places where families and children can recreate, where our seniors can go to congregate. I mean, all of that makes a neighborhood. And when I worked for the Department of Neighborhood Development especially, we looked at the issue of development holistically. So we were not just talking about plopping down housing, yet we knew that it was important to increase the housing stock in the city of Boston. And we also understood, and the other candidates here will speak to that, you'll hear the issue of transparency. Well, community process it was very much an integral part of my efforts to bring housing to the city. And I think that I was able to accomplish a lot during my time as chief of housing. I'm happy that Mike Ross mentioned neighborhood development, because it was neighborhood development that had the chief responsibility for managing the community development block grant, which are the federal funds that come into the city to help to create housing and workforce housing, housing for working people, but also housing for the homeless. And we do have an issue still in the city of Boston regarding poverty. And the fact that that gap between the haves and the have-nots is widening. And as mayor, the next mayor, I will focus on those issues around people being able to get housing who may have little or no income. And I will pledge to keep my eye on the prize regarding that piece. But we all like beautiful things. We like attractive housing. and I will work towards that, and we'll hear more of that as we proceed.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you. Councilor Consalvo.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Let me say that first, the first question was great because it was so broad. It's a way to, I think, really start a true discussion and dialogue about development and building in our city and the importance of architects and architecture and your society as it relates to contributing to that debate. I think to answer the first question, for me, it's a couple of things. One, the quality of the architecture as we plan and build things in our city. Good, smart planning that deals with smart growth and really has a commitment to the sustainability issue. And a real discussion about what sustainability means, the broad definition of sustainability. Tying in transportation, a real discussion about transportation, both on the state level in terms of the issues with the MBTA and how we deal with public transportation, but also when we talk about building and development, both in the downtown and as that expands out into the neighborhoods, how we build our developments and our commercial developments and our housing developments, how transportation ties into that. If you build it, we need to be thinking about who's coming there, where will they go, how will they get there, how will they go to and from work, how will they go to and from the social settings they need to go to, where are they going after work, and then tying in creative solutions to the affordable housing crisis. I think in terms of the architecture piece, as a mayor and someone who will work with all of you and the architects in the city, that's an important component. How does the architecture of a development fit into the public realm? How does it fit into our streetscape? How do we relate the architecture of the design of a building into the streetscape of the surrounding communities? I think that's critical. Sustainability is a huge issue, and I think the issue of sustainability is about how do we build commercial and residential development that stands the test of time, that continues to grow and have multiple uses beyond its first emerging use, and that we have sustainability that deals with the environmental issues. Forward thinking about new developments commercially and residentially that save energy, reduce water demand, reduce dependency on our public infrastructure, and reduce impacts on our public infrastructure. These are all critical pieces of the sustainability issue. And we need to be having a serious discussion and a long-term discussion about our zoning code and really updating our zoning code to reflect issues of architecture, of sustainability, as well as dealing with the issues of climate change and their impacts on the future building and future development in our city. Our zoning code needs to reflect the real issues that Sandy brought up. That was a little too close for comfort, and I think a code that takes to the impact of climate change and the real concerns and ideas that each of you in this room and the people around the city have, educating and guiding us as to what that code should look like and how we forward think to address those issues of sustainability is critical. I also believe in an open administration that's going to work and harness the power and ideas in all areas, education, public safety, but critically in architecture and development and sustainability and affordable housing and real solutions and forward-thinking solutions to transportation. I look forward to working with all of you on how we get those questions answered and how we have a real forward thinking on that. And also it's about being able to understand that our building and our development needs to be sustainable in terms of the people who live there. Making sure that we have sidewalks and streets and pedestrian access that's safe for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you to the BSA and for everyone being here today. I'm John Connolly. I'm one of your Boston City Councilors at large. I've been serving for 6 years on the City Council. Boston has competitive advantages that make us the envy of the nation in many ways. Our world-class colleges and universities, hospitals and laboratories, industries created here, nonprofits that are groundbreaking, and a rich history. It all combines to draw talent to Boston. But increasingly, we have to compete harder for that talent. Increasingly, we have to be mindful of the challenges we face around climate change, being a coastal city. And increasingly, we need to think about how we nurture and sustain our advantages because we can't take them for granted. What we need, and what I will do as mayor, is bring a holistic plan into place that connects our land use planning with our transportation planning, with our environment planning, and with our housing planning. And that means starting with a more transparent development process. We need to get out of a system that is basically about who you know and not the merit of your project. We need true transparency to break that dynamic. We need to get out of a system that's zoning by variance and find a way to take a real honest look at how we zone so that we don't begin projects pitting one side against another. We need to look at how we integrate housing policy into the development process. We're great at affordable housing, and I don't want to cede any ground on that. We need to do that for every Bostonian. And we're great at luxury condos, but we've forgot the middle market. And we need to find a way to make sure that we can nurture our young professionals, our young artists, and our young families in this city who flock here in their 20s but flee in their 30s. And that means that we need a true middle market housing strategy. We also need to get to a place where we don't sit out the transportation debate and say that's a state issue. Boston needs to get in that transportation debate and recognize that it's vital to sustainable policy and to our housing policy and to our economic development. And when it comes to environment, we need a true culture of sustainability in this city. And I'm proud to have been the councilor who shepherded through the passage of the Stretch Energy Code, supported the board regulations, served on the Mayor's Climate Change Action Committee, and I'll look forward to being a bold leader in terms of greening our city. But I'll say this, there was one piece missing from this question, and it is an excellent question, and that's our schools. We want quality schools in every neighborhood. We have $600 million deferred maintenance hole on our schools, $1.2 billion in new construction needs for our Boston public schools, and that's why today, right after this forum, I'm going to propose and file in the council today that we look at creating large project fast track in exchange for those developments funding new school construction or major renovations to our Boston public schools. And that's an investment in our future, in our economic development, in our economy, and in our environment when we do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Barros. Thanks.
Good morning, and thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting. So as the Executive Director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative for the past 13 years, I have worked hard around the question of planning and designing for safe, healthy, and sustainable neighborhood. And as I think we all know, building development, sustaining the environment, transportation, housing, and growth are not isolated issues. They should be considered together because they're all interrelated. Developments affect environment, transportation affects housing, so on and so forth. Here in Boston, nobody knows that better than the architects. However, as the question asks for your priority, as mayor, my priority, and I don't have to tell you the importance of reducing energy consumption and our carbon footprint and preparedness for sea level rise and climate change, but that's where I would focus. New construction strategies such as LEED certification and stricter energy codes can address only 1% to 2% of building stocks in any given year. Other strategies that affect new and existing buildings under construction, such as the stretch code, move in the right direction to affect a much greater positive change in usage. To this point, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the building sector consumes nearly half of all energy produced in the United States, and 75% of electricity produced in the U.S. goes to operating buildings. Typical commercial buildings use twice the energy of efficient buildings and 3 times and 3 times that of the highest performing buildings. With 80 billion square feet of commercial space in the U.S., upgrading the energy efficiency of existing buildings is an imperative. And Boston needs to take the lead. As mayor, I'd use the Boston Green Ribbon Commission to issue a study on using energy efficiency of existing buildings and recommendations on the implementation. And we would use the Building Energy and Use Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance to set benchmarks and then invest in technology and solutions that would help to strengthen the capacity for Boston to move to more energy efficient buildings. Boston's technology sector will make it easier for private owners to follow suit, moving Boston to hitting the goals and being a leader in the country in reducing our carbon footprint, moving to energy efficiency in commercial buildings, preparedness in sea level rise, and climate change. Thank you very much.
Councilor Arroyo, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Felix Arroyo. Allow me to apologize. I'm suffering a little bit from a cold, so if you see me coughing, it is not for lack of interest. It's because I'm not feeling well right at the moment. I am very proud. Sorry, John.
Don't touch him.
I might have took a sip out of your water by accident. I am very proud to have been one of your at-large city councilors with the honor of serving on the council and the privilege of representing all of Boston neighborhoods. I'm in my 4th year doing that. I was taught growing up, and I believe so were you, that it is our responsibility to leave this world better than how we found it. Well, then how we build, how we develop, and how we grow as a city is key to that. Buildings and open space tend to outlive us. How we build them, caring about our environment, understanding that we borrow this land from our children, understanding that our buildings must be green buildings, that we must build them to be green, and those that were here before this concept became the norm must be retrofitted. I was proud to support the energy reporting ordinance, and I'm proud to support green tech, which will allow us to retrofit our buildings. Understanding smart growth, understanding that we have to, these things are all connected. Transportation, housing, jobs. And we can develop in a way that understands that connection and understands that that is the smart way of developing. Realizing that, well, we have to make sure that the market continues to build market rate housing. We have to be intentional about building low-income housing and moderate housing. That is an intentional act, and it won't happen by accident. We have to know that building matters, the way they look matter, our open spaces matter, because we've all been in great-looking buildings and felt good about ourselves. And I think we've all been in not-so-great-looking buildings and not have had the same feeling. When it comes to the idea of green and understanding that we borrow land from our children, I've been proud to lead on the Council on the Issue of the Environment. I am the one who moved to make sure that we bring recycling to all of our Boston public schools when it was not there. I'm the one moving that we make recycling easier in our downtown buildings when we know many of our downtown buildings don't recycle. I'm the one moving that we bring recycling to our city's parks. Because as a youth sports coach, I used to watch my kids throw their little Gatorade bottles at best in the trash can. There should be a recycling bin there. I'm moving that everywhere you see a trash can, you see a recycling bin next to it. I'm moving for curbside compost pickup because weekly. Because in San Francisco, when they brought this, they now see 78% less trash. In Portland, they now pick up trash every 2 weeks because they don't need to pick it up so often because they're picking up single stream and composting. In the end, buildings matter, open space matter, because community matters. And if we do this right, that means also understanding that no one deserves to be left out. And we have to move forward intentionally in a way that says everyone in the city deserves opportunities, and that includes safe and affordable neighborhoods to live in, access to transportation, and an ability to get to work.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'd like to invite Councilor Yancey up. Yancey, the councilor was a little bit of a late RSVP last night, but I wanted to give him an opportunity to answer this question as well.
First of all, can you folks hear me?
You know, you want to take one of the handhelds. Yeah, because this is not working.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to the BSA for hosting this. I was actually told yesterday that I would not be able to participate because it's so crowded. And no, that's fine.
That's fine.
That's fine. I prefer to stand anyhow.
You've got 3 minutes, so
Okay.
please go for it.
All right. I come from a family of 9, so you can understand why I'm very comfortable right now. I was number 6. And whenever the family got together, there were 11 of us. And if we ran out of seats, we just put a board between 2 chairs, and everyone sat at the table. So this is fine. We have to make accommodations. But I decided to come, even though I knew I wasn't on your list and you don't have my bio, because Boston demands bold leadership. Boston is a city of inclusion, not exclusion. So I wanted to be here and tell you that I am a candidate for mayor of Boston. I am a certified candidate for mayor of Boston.
Is this your official announcement?
I am the longest serving member of the Boston City Council. I chair the committee on waste management when we introduced recycling to the city of Boston. I supported many projects that are now landmarks in the city of Boston, including the convention center. In terms of priorities, I believe that the responsibility of city government is to ensure we have a strong and effective infrastructure to encourage growth and development in the private sector. So that's why when I was first elected to the Boston City Council, my first project really was to require that we build a police station in Mattapan. Believe it or not, we only had a trailer. We had a trailer to substitute for a police station in Mattapan. Now we have a full-service police station because I know that if people don't feel safe, if we don't have an environment that encourages economic development, then very little is going to happen. And from there, I supported the building of 2 community centers and an award-winning library, the Mattapan Branch Library. And my only regret this morning is that this is not being held in the Alice W. Yancey Community Meeting Room in Mattapan, because her spirit is certainly with me. She and my dad raised 9 of us. I was the first to go to college. I graduated from Tufts University, got my master's at Harvard, but most importantly, for the last 30 years, I've been fighting to make sure that Boston's remains a great city and build on the legacy of another Bostonian named Charles Bulfinch, who was a great architect in his own right. And I also believe that in terms of the future, continue investment in infrastructure, but also protect the Emerald Necklace and other very significant quality of life spaces that make Boston the unique city that it is today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. That was great, really. Thank you very much. There's a lot of substance there, and in fact, some of my questions have been already addressed. But at this point, I'd like to try to mix it up and just semi-randomly call on some of the counselors and other candidates to answer questions that you may not have anticipated. So this one is for Councilor Consalvo. Why not? We'll start in the middle there now. Councilor, right outside our door is the Rose Kennedy Greenway. It's a beautiful linear park that I sometimes call the peace dividend for the city enduring 20 years of the Big Dig. It's an interesting dilemma because it's a city park, but the land is owned by the State Department of Transportation. The maintenance and the programming of the park is from a nonprofit conservancy, and yet the funding is devoted from the legislature. And so there's many different fathers of the Greenway. And right now there's no executive director of the conservancy. So the question is, do you think Boston would benefit if the city were to take over the Greenway completely, so that there'd be a single vision for the programming and the funding and the development along the Greenway? And whether you do or not, how do you propose, given the legislature's cuts and threats of more cuts to the Greenway budget, how do you propose to fund it in the future?
Well, I think that there needs to be a long...
You have 2 minutes, I'm sorry, 2 minutes.
I think, obviously, like everyone, that the Greenway is extremely important. It's an extremely important public space. It's an extremely important public park, and it's important to the heart of our city, right where it's located. So I think we clearly need a long-term commitment to sustaining and maintaining the Greenway. That has to be a priority of any mayor who comes in. It has to be a priority of our governor, whoever that governor is. And it has to be a priority of the citizens of the city of Boston, all of us, I think, working together to make sure we have that long-term commitment to the park. And we need to work aggressively to make sure we have long-term funding strategies in place. And that means both public and private funding that has to be in place to help address the issues with the Greenway.
For example?
In terms of?
For example, public and private funding.
So I think the public should continue to maintain its commitment to maintaining the Greenway from the state and from the city. And I also think that public-private partnerships work best. And so in terms of private fundraising, people who are committed to the public piece of the Greenway, that has to also be a commitment. I don't think any one person could do it alone. I don't think any one person should be expected to do it alone. I think our public and private partnerships work best. And so as mayor, I would come in committed to making sure that we maintain a laser-like focus on keeping the Greenway sustainable, both short-term and long-term, and that we will work with all of our public and private partners to make sure that gets done.
Thank you. So it doesn't sound like you want to wrest control of the Greenway from the state legislature, the partnership that we have now, city, state, conservancy, nonprofit.
So I think that certainly I'd be open to a discussion that what's in the best interest of the Greenway and what's in the best interest of maintaining the Greenway as a public treasure in our community. And you know, as someone who welcomes any ideas and is open to anything, I would be willing to have any discussions. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the power struggle that you talk about and who gets it and who's maintaining it, it has to be about what's in the best interest of the Greenway and the public responsibility we have to maintain our commitment to keep this treasure maintained in our city, funded long-term, and committed long-term.
Yeah, great, thank you. You know, I'm going to go now to Ms. Guller-Ritchie, and this was something that had been mentioned by a couple of other candidates. So I may quickly ask for a show of hands or something so we can all be heard on this. The Boston Harbor Associates has produced a really chilling study, I think many of you have seen it, that shows projected sea level rise in this city in the next really short term. It shows that most of the financial district and this great new innovation district and a lot of the waterfront, the North End, could be flooded twice a day, every day at high tide. And if Sandy or Nemo, somebody mentioned Sandy, had occurred here at high tide, we would have seen flooding all the way up to City Hall. So this is a problem we have today. It's not just a way in the future kind of situation. So my question to you is, as mayor, you know, how specifically will you direct city agencies to prepare for or to mitigate this threat of the coming floods? Yeah.
Big issue. Important issue. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And I think that we have an opportunity to pull together the experts in the field, which would include the membership of the BSA, the Preservation Alliance, and others who know this, but it's a public safety issue. So we need to make sure that our public safety officials are also at the table to discuss this. Certainly we can learn from other communities, whether it's from the communities of New Jersey and New York City that suffered the brunt of Hurricane Sandy, and I think that in my role as mayor, I would have an opportunity to reach out to all of those who've had to grapple with these issues and look at best practices and try to replicate those and apply them, replicate them here in the city of Boston. You know, there is climate change. I think we've demonstrated, the nature has demonstrated that to us. I don't think few will argue that is what we're grappling with. The question is, what do we do with existing structures, and how do we shore them up? Obviously, new construction provides us with a unique and very important opportunity to bring online structures that will withstand in terrible, inclement weather. It's the current existing structures that are going to pose a challenge for us because it's expensive. And what do we do? And I do think that we want to preserve these older buildings that may not be prepared to deal with this difficult weather that we could face.
Yeah. So this is a question then for everybody, really. I know that it's very true what you say about the existing buildings being really the problem, and some of the historic buildings even. I know that the City of Boston is working now on developing new regulations that would require all developers in this flood zone, which is rather large, to prepare plans for mitigating and preparing for these kinds of sea level rise events. So I just wanted to find out very quickly if all of the candidates here today support those. We are committed to continuing to require developers to prepare plans for sea level rise in their applications for development and even for existing buildings. Everybody's hands. So the rest, so the record will show. I'm going to call on Councilor Ross just for a second.
Renee, just follow up on that.
Very quickly.
Principles of resilient design, like what we saw at Spalding Rehab, are exactly what we need to do. Move mechanicals up to the roof, electricals, HVACs. That's what we're going to have to use and codify into our zoning regulations. And just if I may, as a follow-up to the question to Councilor Consalvo, we have to enable the Rose County Greenway to foster these public-private partnerships. We did it on the Boston Common. We showed how we could turn that space around. We absolutely, if there's any park that can foster those partnerships, it's in the middle of our city. There aren't all parks in our city that can do that, and that's where public resources are most important. But the partnerships, they should be downtown because that's where a lot of the businesses are, and there's a huge opportunity to leverage those partnerships.
So because you jumped in, I'm now going to put you a little on the spot and ask if you support a business improvement district for the Greenway, in which the adjacent businesses would be contributing to the maintenance and programming of the Greenway.
I do. I think that the right model could be struck. I think if it didn't happen, it would happen anyway, that businesses would pitch in and try to help. I also think we have an opportunity to connect the Rose Kennedy Greenway with the Frederick Law Olmsted and have the most amazing ribbon of parks throughout our city and encourage park tourism for people to come to our city for the very purpose of traveling our entire city from downtown to Franklin Park using our park system, whether it's through a bicycle or some other means of getting through those parks, stopping along the way in our business districts, spending their money, and really seeing our city from a park side view.
Well, Councillor Connolly, I have another question for you just to come up anyway, so you might want to tag on. I knew you wanted to say something about this, but if I can ask you what I had planned here. And because you mentioned the Boston Redevelopment Authority and its transparency issues. So I wanted to ask about the BRA. It's perhaps unique among big cities in this country in that it merges the development and the planning functions. And sometimes those are in conflict, setting up a clash between city planners who have certain priorities and the developers and builders who have sometimes not congruent priorities. So do you think that this kind of structure sets up like a healthy tension or like a creative tension, or do you think that the BRA should be restructured and that the two functions should be separated?
So I don't think it works presently because although we have thrived from a development perspective, we are trapped in a system that puts the focus on who you know rather than the merit of your project. And that's what we need to break, and that's the transparency that we need transparent decision making within the BRA. And so I think that you have to find a way for economic development, which is driven by revenue generation as the goal, and planning, which can often end up in conflict with that, find a way to have a wall within the BRA that separates them and takes us out of that. But it's more than that if we really want to break this culture in Boston of the who do you know culture. And so I look at pieces. Go to the BRA website. You're going to find the budget from 2 or 3 years ago. Go to the BRA website and look at the status of a project. It will say under review, but it will give you no details other than that. So we need to utilize technology for true transparency for the BRA. Look at our BRA board. Why don't they have term limits? They ought to, and I'll make sure they do if I'm mayor. It's about having to go through 3 levels of design when we ought to just leave it with BCDC. That's what that's about. So there's a lot that we can do to change the BRA and the culture in the BRA and still be a city that embraces bold, smart, principled development. It's not about being anti-development. It's about a level playing field to have great development. That's what we want to do. If I can pick up on climate change quickly, I just want to say, absolutely, the key piece has to be design that takes into account massive flooding. That study noted there'd be 83 million square feet of flooding damage in the event of a superstorm. This is already happening. We've seen this in other cities. I authored the resolution that opened us up to fund a joint study with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council focused on climate change mitigation. We need to push even farther on this. It's not just about design, though. Like too many problems in cities in our city, the people who will be most impacted by superstorm and by sea level rise will be our poorest people. We've got to put emergency preparedness money behind this. We need to drill, practice, and prepare for this to happen and to think about what happens in this event to make sure that all Bostonians are safe and that we don't end up in a situation where we bear the brunt of a horrific storm or some horrific event, and it is our poorest who will suffer the most.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's great. No applause, please, until we get to the end. I have a question now for Councillor Arroyo, just for a little change of pace, and you're welcome to tag on if you wanted to say something about the earlier questions. Should you become mayor, you will occupy a building that is almost universally reviled by the public, except by architects, among whom it is almost universally revered. This is a famous Coleman McKinnell project, so-called heroic architectural style. But love it or hate it, what is the solution to the problems that are plaguing City Hall? I'm thinking about the deferred maintenance there, the windy, vast open plaza, the poor wayfinding when you get inside so that you feel sort of like a rat in the maze as a citizen. Do you think that City Hall should be moved to another area, which Mayor Menino at one point suggested, perhaps to the waterfront? Should it be torn down? What is your solution to the problem of the City Hall?
Thank you for the question. As somebody who works at City
Yeah.
Hall, I guess I'm in conflict with some of the architects about revering the building. I would say that while the look of it is unique and could be pleasing on the eye, the use of it is not easy. And a public building really has to be inviting to the public. It really has to be a space where the public feels comfortable in it, happy to do its work there, and visit its elected leaders there, demand accountability from its leaders, and you do that often with your presence. City Hall doesn't work well for that. So one, I think you have to work with folks around coming up with a plan on how do you make City Hall work better. As a city councilor, I understand the maze you're talking about. Even myself, when you tell people to go to the second floor and they realize there's no second floor on the elevator, you're giving them it's almost like a trick question. You'll get help if you figure this out, right? And so we have to make that work. Am I open to moving City Hall? Yes, I actually am open to moving City Hall, but I'm not open to moving City Hall to someplace that's not accessible by all of our lines, public transportation. In the end, government needs to be accessible. It needs to be friendly towards constituents being able to use it. They need to feel as if they can be in that space. They need to feel powerful in that space because, in fact, they own that space. And so it's whether it's making City Hall work better or moving City Hall to a place where it's still accessible and works better. I'm open to both of those ideas.
Thank you. My next question is actually for Representative Walsh, who looks like you wanted to say something. Yeah. And it's another question about the BRA, but if you have something that you wanted to say about these other issues.
Well, I just think with City Hall, it's
Yeah.
not the most efficient or beloved space in the city of Boston, but as mayor of Boston, I think we have to be very careful. There's been a lot of discussion about do we move it and build a new City Hall. We have people in the city that can't afford an apartment, and I think it's taxpayers' money. We have to be very careful with the fact of do we build a new building, and who pays for that? The taxpayers. And I think that there's a lot of smart people in this room today that we can come up with some ways of making City Hall Plaza fit in perfectly. We talk about green space around City Hall. I think there's been more studies of City Hall than there was to get rid of the central artery. And I think that we can look at amphitheaters, get the fountains going again. On the back side, on the Faneuil Hall side, it's not inviting to the eye. It's not inviting to the community. As people come in from out of town, they look at a wall. And I think that's not inviting. And I think that as mayor of Boston, we can make some adjustments on City Hall Plaza. That architecture won awards, world-renowned awards. I think it's important for us to look at that building. When you sit back and say, wait a second, let's look at City Hall. It's a unique building. And all we see is brick. We don't think of the design of the building on the outside. We think of the brick around the plaza. So I think there is clearly a way for us to do a better job of having more open space in the city of Boston, inviting people to come to our City Hall Plaza to enjoy what's there. And I think as mayor of Boston, that's one of the things I plan on doing.
Great. This next question has to do about the BRA again. It's sort of a variant of the earlier, and this has come up a couple of times. The city's zoning code. It's famously restrictive, and as a result, almost any new proposal that comes up needs a variance. And this sets up a kind of, I might say, a kind of genteel bribery, whereby the developers negotiate with the city, offering amenities in order to be able to build outside the code, right? I'm wondering what you think of this system. Is it working pretty well to balance the public's needs against private developer needs? Or, should the city zoning be updated to be more transparent and less malleable?
2 minutes, do I get?
Yeah.
Okay.
Quickly.
I think in some cases it works, in some cases it doesn't work. And I think that's one of the frustrations that a lot of people in this room have and a lot of people in the city have. You have certain developments and developers that come into the city and we want to fast track it and we want to make sure the development works. And we have other developers that are in the city that sit on a piece of land for 10, 20 years that can't seem to get their project moving, even though the project they have is pretty good. A couple things that I would look at. I would look at ISD, BRA, ZBA as far as the permitting processes. And
Everybody get those acronyms? Okay.
And I'm not going to go into them because I have 2 minutes, so I can't. I'm going to lose the time here.
Yeah, a minute and a half.
when we talk about streamlining permitting, it's something that we really have to do. We have to, one thing I'd like to do is possibly almost have a customer service representative when somebody comes into the city of Boston or somebody wants to build a house. They have a person that helps them through the process. Because in some cases, there's 14 different permitting stations they have to go to be able to build. And that doesn't include what the state puts on there as well. So I think that up at the BRA, we have to be more customer service friendly. I think it's important. The idea of the BRA as a holistic approach to development is good, but the execution that we have up there could be a lot better. We also need to go out and recruit businesses to this city. And we don't do enough of that. We're losing businesses day after day. We've lost insurance companies. We're about to lose Verizon. We can't build new businesses if we're losing our old businesses. And I think the BRA, a lot of people I've heard on the campaign trail, and before that, as a state representative, people are afraid in some cases to come to our city to do some development. And I think that we have to work on that. And lastly, part of this question, I believe, and I feel like I haven't had a question in an hour, we also have to be sensitive to the community. We have a lot of neighborhoods in the city of Boston, and when we think of neighborhoods, we generally think of Dorchester, South Boston, Mattapan, West Roxbury, but down in our business districts are neighborhoods as well. So we have to be very cognizant of the fact of the people that live there so that they have their say at the table too. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Bill Walczak the next question, and then, well, you know what? I think I'd like to know what the candidates all think about the zoning code in the city of Boston and whether it needs a revamp. Okay, so very quickly, though, like 15 seconds, okay? Councilor Consalvo, thank you.
I appreciate that because it's an important question. Is the zoning code is the guide for all building in the city. And so that's why I mentioned it in my opening remarks about the sustainability piece. As it relates to climate change, the code needs to be reflective as the guide for building in terms of dealing with the climate change issues. We need regulations in the code to do that, to be able to address it. And we need it for all the sustainability issues, such as saving energy, reducing water demand, reducing impacts on public infrastructure. I have amended the zoning code 6 times since I've been on the city council. So to ask whether the code should be looked at and continually, regularly updated, the answer is unequivocally yes. I've taken great pride. It's not a sexy issue. It's kind of boring when you're talking about zoning and updating the code. I'm proud that I've updated the code 6 times because we've worked in my district to make changes to the code that have been progressive and reflective of the tremendous growth we've seen in Rosendale and in Hyde Park and in Mattapan and in West Roxbury. But at the same time, we use the code as a tool to protect public open space and our natural resources, which is a gem that we have out in Southwest Boston. So I'm greatly interested in having a regular schedule of updating the code. Technology is moving faster every day. Our business and development community is moving faster every day. The advances in how we build and get to LEED certification is moving faster every day. The code should regularly be updated to reflect those changes to help the city grow better. And I would say, just to give you a point, Hyde Park and Rosendale had not been rezoned since the 1960s. We did a complete rezoning in 2006 and 7 on that. That shouldn't happen.
Yeah. Ms. Gullah-Ritchie, I know you want to speak next.
Yeah, I just want to just say that we're going to agree that it's an important issue, right? What we haven't touched on is the fact that Mayor Menino did unveil his Housing Boston 2020 plan. And in that plan, there's a goal to bring online 30,000 units of housing by the year 2020. Which is an enormous opportunity to create new rental housing units and home ownership opportunities for the people of the city. It also is an opportunity to, again, look at zoning, to look at the kind of design that we want for the housing units that come online, and to really have a discussion around what they look like, whether it is that we work with you to create prototypes for those kinds of designs for our neighborhoods, for the waterfront, whether we look at the community process and how long that process should take so that it does not go on endlessly, while we look at mitigating factors and whether developers should have a role in giving back in some way to the community and the community quality of life. So I do think that, as mayor coming in, I will want to very much have a way to bring you all into this conversation about zoning and try to structure it in a way so that it is predictable, it is transparent, residents have a way to give input and so on. I just want to say quickly, since we're looping back to previous questions, this issue of City Hall. You know, I would just say that we can invest our money in other things, and that the demolition of City Hall and relocation of City Hall would not be my top priority. It's absolutely going to be jobs, and we do expect a lot of jobs to come online in the next decade, about 100,000 jobs. We've got working people who are going to need housing. We've got issues around family stabilization. There are all kinds of things. So if the demolition or the relocation of City Hall is something that you all care about, I just want you to know that I probably am not going to be your candidate. I think that there are going to be ways to improve that plaza. I think it is accessible by the red line, the green line, the orange line. And so what we need to do is to look at the services that are made available at City Hall to make sure that they are, that the lines are a little bit longer, that, you know, that people are going to be able to access the services that they need. And we also need to get out in the neighborhoods where people live and be really customer service in terms of bringing the resources to the people where they are.
Thank you. Mr. Barros, you wanted to speak on this?
Yes.
Very quickly, though. Come on.
I will, yes, here it is. You know, just to kind of loop back to some questions real quickly,
This is on
we
the
need to talk
BRA
about
zoning code.
It is, and
Okay.
it's connected to, I think, BRA.
Okay.
Right, so first and foremost, I think I wanted to address the fact that we needed to separate planning from development. And we need to separate planning from development because the tensions that exist compromise both. And typically what gets compromised is planning. It's foresight, it's vision, it's where we want to go long term, and it gets compromised by the bottom line of development. And we've got to make sure that we can hold that tension as a city. Planning needs to be out of the BRA, we need to restructure it and make it not just a firewall, but two different departments. And planning needs to be city. BRA is a quasi-public organization. Then the question of planning for rezoning is out of the BRA. And that is a more engaged process that is not tampered by development. Allow development to look at the feasibility of doing things after we have pushed forward for what Boston needs. Allow us to talk about preparedness in the city and what we need as a city long term. Allow us to think about and rethink about the districts, right? The district overlays. There are certain parts of the city where we have 3 district overlays in one area. What's primary? What's secondary? What are we really trying to do in that part of the city? And I think we have to talk about it in a generation and not in just 5-10 years, and then revisit it and make sure that it's working. So zoning needs to happen, and we need a full participatory process. And zoning needs to happen in that we take the bids in consideration. And when I think about the bids, I think about not just the greenway, but when we think about public art, right? The bids needs to be used for public art, and we can make a case for economic development through bids that are used for greening and efficiency, and also for public art and open space. And we need to use that particularly in downtown Boston, but not only, also in the neighborhoods.
Thank you very much. That anticipated one of my next questions. I'm going to ask this next question of Bill Walczak, and then we can all sort of loop back in again, and we'll find a way to get Councilor Yancey in there too. Tick, tick, tick. So this is a question for Bill Walczak. This is about the MBTA. It's forever beset with funding problems, old equipment, erratic schedules, and yet ridership is up because people want alternatives to cars. So how do we work our way through this constant funding shortfall that we have at the MBTA? I want to know from all of the candidates if you support the governor's proposal for an income tax increase or the legislature's proposal for a gasoline tax increase to support the MBTA. If so, how much? And or should the riders, should the ridership absorb more of the cost through a fare increase?
Okay.
Thank you.
And I have a lot of catch up to do
I know
here,
it.
just so
Everybody
you know.
does.
All right, so if we don't deal with transportation, we will kill the goose that lays the golden egg, because the development community needs to know that there's dramatic investment in the infrastructure of our public transit system. I'm astonished that the legislature came out with the proposal that it did, because frankly the business community was completely behind the idea of the gas tax as a way of providing the kinds of money that's necessary to be able to rebuild the infrastructure. If we don't rebuild the infrastructure, I'm telling you, it's day over. We're not going to be able to keep the development of downtown Boston. We will not be able to build the kind of housing in downtown Boston that doesn't have parking that's associated with it. We want to be able to build a great dense city downtown, but we're not going to be able to do it without dramatic investment in our public transit service. So I
Sounds like
totally
that you
support
support-
either one of the governors or frankly, the business community's gas tax idea about providing $1 billion a year to replace the 35-year-old trains on the Red Line that I took here this morning. So anyway, I have other issues that I want to bring up, just a few things. If we don't deal with sea level rising, it's going to, I mean, really, it could be this fall where we wind up with a terrible nor'easter that comes in and causes $1 billion worth of damage. I mean, we should be out in front of this issue, way out in front of this issue, because we need to spend the money before it. You know, in the Netherlands, they're actually creating additional floodplains. Where are our floodplains? You know, they're looking at mitigation for it. We need to figure out how we're going to deal with this, and we need to be spending the money now so that we're not spending the money replacing the buildings that are destroyed in the process of the next horrible storm that comes in. In terms of City Hall, frankly, I wouldn't replace City Hall at all, but what I would do is I'd try to make it more friendly. I'd like the idea of having Hanover Street go through there. Unfortunately, with the security issues, what we wound up doing is making our public buildings into very private buildings, and as a result, we wind up with City Hall Plaza being this completely dead area. If we were able to put the Hanover Street through there, maybe open up the back entrance. I love the idea of the Boston History Museum. Maybe we should move the Boston History Museum into the back entrance of City Hall and create more a live kind of plaza there in the process. In terms of the BRA and zoning, the biggest problem we have is we don't do master planning in the city very often, and we need to do more master planning, and then we need to codify the master plans in zoning so we know what's going on. The craziness of having to go for a zoning variance every time you want to do it makes people crazy. It's the kind of thing where you wind up 6 months wait before you're able to build a deck on the side of your house, or worse in the case of businesses that want to grow or increase in size. So those are big issues, and I think to what Charlotte's point about housing, we have to make. The governor said that we need 10,000 units per year in order to be able to bring the housing market back to some sort of modicum of reasonableness. And obviously we're not doing it with 30,000 units between now and 2020. We have to figure out ways of expediting the process. My suggestion is transit-oriented development with large density in the areas of the transit lines. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you. We're backing up quite a bit here, so I thought I would let Councilor Yancey just respond to whatever you want that's come up so far. You have to use that. Yeah, this doesn't work. And then we have a couple of more prepared questions.
First of all, on the issue of the Boston Redevelopment Authority, I think the BRA is broken, quite frankly. We do need to establish a legitimate planning agency in the city of Boston. Zoning is a living document and should be updated to accommodate the different needs. We are now in the 21st century, and much of the zoning that we have in place dates back to the 20th, so we have to update that. With regards to Boston City Hall, as a resident of Boston City Hall for now 30 years, I think it's time for repurposing that building and coming up with a more creative solution to city government. And that may well mean the building of a new city hall that, again, reflects the needs of this century, not the last one. I also like to harken back to Kevin White. I think he was onto something when he established the little city halls. People felt closer to their government at that time. And today, it's a real burden for city residents to trek down to City Hall to pay the bills and to do other city business, when I don't think it's totally necessary, particularly if we can ensure that everyone is online and we can do a lot of the transactions electronically. But I believe that Boston in the 21st century can take advantage of the rich talent in this room to come up with a creative solution to the location of our city government. Again, BRA should be broken up, and we should have a planning agency that is actually above the Boston Redevelopment Authority. It was created to redevelop blighted areas, and now we have the scenario where across the street from the Paramount was defined, the Haymarket parcel was defined as a blighted area, and directly across from that was the Millennium Development, a $600 million development, and yet we had to call that blighted to justify BRA development.
Right.
makes no sense. Thank
Can
you.
you tell me just very briefly, because I do want to get everybody on the record about this, the funding for the MBTA? Are you for an increase in the gas tax, the income tax, or
Well,
more fair increases?
I am not a fan of increasing gas tax. I think it's a very regressive form of taxation, particularly for lower income residents. I believe that part of the solution should be restructure the debt. As all of you know, part of the burden that the MBTA is bearing is the debt from the big dig, which I don't think is justifiable. So I believe that once we restructure that debt, there'll be less of a burden on the MBTA and perhaps more flexibility to make the necessary improvements to the MBTA infrastructure, including new trains as well as tracks. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Can I just go down the line here and see what people think about the funding for the MBTA? Gas tax, income tax,
I
fair
agree
increase.
with Councilor Yancey around the debt issue. I also am not a supporter of regressive taxation. Exactly, very proud supporter of progressive taxation that understands that taxation should be done on in the symbol of most ability to pay. I see the sales tax, for instance, of a fairly regressive tax, and support the governor's idea of lowering the sales tax. You know, it wasn't just increasing the income tax; it was also lowering taxes in other places. And I think we cannot lose that piece there. So yes, I do support the added revenue for our MBTA system, but it's because transportation is so vital. You have to be able to get from point A to point B. That is at the level of the most basic necessities to make a society to work. People have to get to point A to point B, whether it's through bicycling, whether it's walking, whether it's driving a vehicle, and then whether it's using transportation system. But on top of that, we have to look at our public transportation in our city and see if it is actually fair. See if someone who lives in Mattapan can get to downtown in a way that's fair and reasonable as compared to someone who lives in the neighborhood that I live in Jamaica Plain. And we have to see why or why not is that the case. Public transportation is key, and when we look at neighborhoods that tend to suffer more income disparities, we have to see, is transportation a part of that problem? I believe it is, and we have to look at that public transportation. The other piece around government and accessibility, around City Hall, in the end, the thing that matters the most is that government is accessible and responsive to its constituents. How do you do that? I think you judge folks, frankly, on how they campaign. If they campaign a grassroots-style campaigner that understands that each voter matters, that understands that each voice matters, that meets you where you live, where you work, where you spend your time, at your doorsteps, at your coffee shop, then I think you can guess exactly how they will govern. And if they don't do that, you also have a sense of seeing how they will govern. I am very proud of my record as a city councilor, being an accessible city councilor, one who's in every single neighborhood, every single night, and I'm proud of how I'm campaigning because I believe that will show voters exactly how I intend to govern.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barras, just on the tax increase question, okay?
So I absolutely agree. I was there when the elevator went down in Dudley Square, and we were promised replacement services of equal quality, and we haven't gotten it. We're there when we protested to make sure that the Fairmont line was open and was available for our residents in Upham's Corner. And there's a lot more we need to do. We need to go with the governor's plan with reducing the sales tax and increasing the income tax. It's the way to do it. It generates more economic development opportunities, and it's a progressive tax method that I support 100%. But then we need to make sure that whatever comes back is fair, fair and equal to the different neighborhoods throughout the city. And it's not only connecting us to downtown, but it's connecting the neighborhoods. I don't know this guy because I can't get to this neighborhood, and that's pathetic. I do know you, but Felix, I'm not going to touch you. But I'm meeting more and more people in JP these days through house parties because I'm a candidate, right? And we talk about the fact that I can't get to JP, and that's pathetic. 45 minutes for me to get to downtown. I can walk there quicker than taking the T. We need to do something. We need to be serious about it, and the progressive tax proposals are the way to go.
Councilor Connolly.
Thanks, Renee. I support the governor's budget. I thought it was a big vision and the type of bold leadership that we need to have at the city level. As well, I support the progressive tax scheme behind it. I just point out on the gas tax piece, I don't want to put that kind of burden on our poorest residents, but I also want to be mindful of good climate change policy as well when we think about gas tax. But that doesn't have to be part of it. The governor had it right in the first place. We're a compact city. We also need to focus in this transportation piece on being a more walk-friendly city and a more bike-friendly city. We need to bring cycle tracks into our city at a real great pace. And I think we need to recognize that that's part of real transportation policy, making sure we're thinking about biking and walking as legitimate transportation methods. On the T, I love the governor's broad vision and the rail expansion. I love what he did with the investments around bike infrastructure, but we've got to recognize that post Big Dig in this economy, it's going to be hard to get the funding we need for the large-scale projects. And so what I think we need to focus on is, one, maintenance of the existing T infrastructure in the city, doing things like getting new cars on our subway lines, bringing those smaller units onto the commuter rail tracks that can run more frequently in the urban core. We also need to bring back the notion of the urban ring. And it was forgotten in the governor's budget. That's one point of disagreement I had with him on that. And listen, we may not be able to fund the urban ring from that perspective around rail, but we ought to have real rapid transit bus in Boston. We're bus snobs. We like our subways. We don't like our buses. But you can understand why. Because we don't do things like have signalization. We don't do things like have the appropriate size buses. And we don't give great service to all of our people. So if we focus on maintenance service, rapid transit bus, and push for those connectors through an urban ring, we can make great progress here. If we don't do it, we're undermining our economic future in this city.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Gonsalvo.
Thank you
I
very
think
much.
the two of you- okay. Go.
So I support the governor's proposal as well. I think that, let's make no mistake about it, it is tough. And let's also not disregard the fact that when we raise taxes, it has a real impact on people's income. And we need to not just throw around the issues with the taxes without understanding the impact it does have on real folks. And that's tough for people who are living paycheck to paycheck. That's a real issue. But at the end of the day, it's tough decisions that are going to help drive the real change that's needed to get our transportation funding and having a real quality, first-class transportation system that then gets people to work, gets them to their jobs, allows them to go out and improve their quality of life, get to their hospitals, get to their medical appointments. So the fact of the matter is, the reality of where we are economically is that we do need more revenue, and we do need investment in our transportation infrastructure to make that happen. I will also agree with Councilor Connolly, although I'm wondering if he looked over at my notes cheating off me like in high school, when he cheated off me back in high school. I agree with him on the urban ring. He's right on with that, the concept of the urban ring and what it means to enhance our transportation. And although it's not in the governor's budget and it's a bigger issue that is going to require a long-term vision that also requires funding, we can have creative solutions that kind of harness the power of the urban ring, that kind of harness the energy, smaller things we can do to help improve our public transportation. Something like smaller shuttle systems that links residents and businesses to our transportation hubs. Our hospitals and universities do it. That's how they're able to get their patients and their employees from point A to point B. So let's think creatively, not just always taxing, and that's an issue, and we need the revenue to invest, but how do we get creative moving forward with a real vision to harness the idea of the urban ring, creatively implement smaller visions of that in the city, and that helps us improve our transportation infrastructure and getting people where they need to be.
Thank you. Ms. Golan-Ritchie.
Okay, so complicated issue and probably no really right answer. So the question is, what can you get done? And I may be the only one or one of the few people here who served in the legislature, also worked for the city. And so I can make broad sort of pronouncements about getting taxes through, but I'm not going to be able to do that without getting the legislature to buy in. It is a tough issue. The gas tax would not be my favorite, but I think that is one that we could get through. So I would probably have to lean on and go that route. But it's going to be a tough job, and the mayor has to be able to work with everybody. And I do think that I am probably one of the ones up here who is in a position to be able to work with members of the legislature, and it would be a challenge. Because why? Because the issues around transportation, the issues that are unique to the city of Boston, aren't always embraced by other communities across the state. Mm. And they've got to deal with the other 351 cities and towns, or 50. And, it may not be what we're trying to do here in Boston, and that's the reality of it. I'll also say, as mayor, I'm sure I'm going to want to advocate for our seniors and wanting them to be able to get breaks on transportation. I'm going to want to advocate for our low-income residents. I'm going to want to advocate for our young people, our students, who have summer jobs who may not be able to afford the full fare. The Fairmount line that was mentioned is now being priced at commuter fare prices. And that's a problem for a community that may not be able to afford those higher prices. So I'm going to want to break, or at least to look at negotiating lower rates so that the Charlie card could be used to get on the Fairmount line at certain stops. That all costs money, I realize that. So in the end, I think that I lean towards that gas tax.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Roth.
Renee, the reality is the governor's plan, as initially envisioned, will not be realized. It will be significantly reduced. And the fact that there is any presumptive mayor for the city of Boston sitting up here who cannot give a full-throated endorsement to the gas tax concerns me. There is no way in a city like Boston that we're going to be able to do any of the things you just heard up here that we can in public transit without paying for it. And the only way we're going to pay for it is going to be through a patchwork of these different tax proposals. That the gas tax is regressive is just simply incorrect when you live in a city. In a city, that's exactly what we want, because we want people to go onto public transit. We want to be able to pay for these things. So I'm surprised that it's taken this long to get someone to say that the gas tax is the right way to go. It's the only way we're going to pay for the public transit. The only way. And the next mayor of the city has to look at the MBTA as their own problem. We have to recognize that if we want late night service, if we want urban ring, if we want to seamlessly integrate the transit of our people, it's going to have to be our problem, and we're going to have to full-throatedly support it. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. And I'm glad that there's some diversity on this question, and we've already heard from the two gentlemen at the end on this particular
hold it.
point. Yeah.
No,
You were
just,
for the gas tax,
Yes, I did
so I've heard
say
from
that
you.
I was in favor.
And you've got the question, so I've heard from you already.
Well, thank you, but you haven't heard from me much at all. So just to appreciate
And
on this, just one real quick point, okay? I think it's really important.
You're not winning my vote here. Ward 22.
Ward 22, Precinct 13?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. All right, just give me
Quickly,
10
quickly.
seconds. 10 seconds. I think it's really important that we have to have a 24-hour city, and I think that's going to take even additional dollars. So we have to really be able to invest heavily in the MBTA, or the city of Boston is going to suffer horribly. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that the mayor is way out there on these issues and being the strongest voice out there for support of the MBTA.
Okay, thank you. And didn't we hear from you already on this question? No? Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Tax, gas tax, income tax. Nobody's been in favor of the fare increase. What a surprise.
No, the fare increase is a bad thing. I'm the only one at the stage that actually had a vote on this.
Yeah.
And right now, we're currently in conference committee, and we have the House and Senate version of this, which Councilor Ross has supported indirectly with the gas tax, and it's something that we do have to do. Hopefully, we will settle with the Senate number. The number's higher. It does more for infrastructure. The governor's plan, those of you out there that went far beyond transportation, it talked about some other issues, and there were some concerns about it. But just real briefly, and I promise I'll be brief, we talk about tough solutions when it comes to this. Comes to transportation. Boston is the economic engine for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So as far as the relationship between the Senate, the mayor's office and the administration, it should be better. We have issues. There's a lot around public transportation. We have a Casey overpass that a lot of us have gone over in the last 2 months hundreds of times. It's falling down. It should not be happening. The people of that neighborhood or the people of the city of Boston should not be accepting that. And I think it's important that there's a better relationship between the mayor's office and the administration. We shouldn't be waiting for them to respond. We should be making sure that they're working with us. When it comes to the MBTA and expansion of services, there's a lot of voice in that. We are a 24-hour city, and we certainly need to keep our MBTA open later at night so people can get in and out of the city.
Thank you very much. We're sort of creeping up on our 90 minutes, but I had 2 more questions because I wanted each candidate, as I planned it, to get a question. So I'm really hoping, Representative Walsh has just mentioned the Casey overpass. So something like that, very quickly, that you would make a priority that's going on in the neighborhoods. And thank you for your cooperation.
So I'm going to try very hard, having not gotten an independent question, to keep it to 30, but I think I should
There's
have a
one
little
more
bit more.
non-independent question coming.
So that project would be the Ferdinand Building in Dudley Square. I have personally waited way too long to see what's happening in Dudley happen. I've been part of the Roxbury Master Planning process, part of the Roxbury Master Plan Oversight Committee, and just the dragging of development in that neighborhood has just been a real test. It's happening. We need to now make sure that the city's got its attention on it. We can move it forward. There's a number of developers that have come forward to want to do adjacent projects and really rebuild the heart of Boston, geographically the heart of Boston, and we can have that as a model where we go forward with the city. And let me say this, on the gas tax. The gas tax is a regressive tax, and not every, so you tax me for gas doesn't mean I won't pay it, because not every neighborhood has equal access to transportation. So some people might live in places where you can make that decision and choice, others don't. And so we've got to be really fair for the injustice and inequality of access to transportation. So what you do first is you do the progressive tax first, and then you gas tax when there's better access, so that you can incentivize people to walk, incentivize people to ride bikes, et cetera. But we've got to stay away from acting like everyone's Boston is the same Boston. It's not designed the same, we have the same access, and it's not equal.
Great, thank you. Neighborhood priority. Go ahead.
So I agree with John Barros that the Ferdinand Building would be number one, but I'd like to say we need a real plan for our Boston Harbor Islands, and we don't have that right now, and that's economic development for the city. And I also want to pick up on my good colleague's point around the gas tax. Look, what I like about a raised gas tax is that it's good climate change policy, reduce fossil fuel dependence. If you're a single mom living in Mattapan and you work in Brighton, you're at the mercy of the MBTA to get to work. That's why the gas tax isn't the answer. And to say, oh, political reality up at Beacon Hill, we need to change that attitude. We need a mayor who's going to be in the transportation debate, not sitting it out and saying that's just the state slug. You know, we need a mayor that's going to assert every ounce of political capital that he or she has to say to the state legislature, it matters for the whole state what happens in Boston. And that's why we need to adopt the income tax increase and the sales tax decrease and focus on improving our T infrastructure, because that supports the whole revenue base for the state. And we need a mayor that'll be involved in that debate, not simply retreat to the gas tax, because that's political reality at Beacon Hill. We need a bold vision in City Hall, the same way we have a bold vision in the governor's office.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Councilor Arroyo, do you have a neighborhood development priority you want to just mention very quickly?
Actually, I'm on singing the chorus here around the Ferdinand Building and what's
Yes.
happening in Dudley. And it's not just the Ferdinand Building. You got the Ferdinand Building. You got what could happen to the old police station there. You got what happened to the actual Dudley station there. And also, but neighborhood priority for me is also looking at economic development citywide. I have a plan that I call Invest in Boston, where it literally says we have $1 billion as a city in deposits right now. In deposits, in banks. What I want to use is leverage that $1 billion to create an investment in our neighborhoods, and saying, if you want this $1 billion deposited in your financial institution, then show me what your small business lending plan is in Boston. Show me what your home lending plan is in Boston. Show me what your plans around foreclosures are and stopping them. Show me what your plans are around hiring Bostonians. Show me what your plans are around development projects. That plan leverages $1 billion of our money and turns into investment in every neighborhood in our city. So we have more than just one project that we all want to speak on referring to. We now are looking at projects that are developing neighborhoods throughout the city, creating jobs throughout the city, allowing entrepreneurs to open small business throughout the city, and creating home ownership throughout our city. That's
Thank you.
the plan I have around Invest Boston. Thank you for the time to share it.
So
Thank you.
to answer the question, I agree with the Ferdinand, because its impact on redeveloping Dudley, and also that Roxbury is where it's located, being this economic engine that can help drive the city. As the mayor said, so goes Roxbury, and Dudley, so goes, the city. But also, I have to agree with Representative Walsh in terms of the impact of the Casey overpass. That bridge coming down, no matter where you stand on it, has an impact on 6 or 7 neighborhoods of the city of Boston, including my district. And whether you're for all the hopeful positive outcomes of that with bike lanes and better pedestrian access and more green space, there is the reality that the next mayor will have to deal with the transportation and infrastructure impact of 6 or 7 different neighborhoods that this transportation hub affects right in the city of Boston.
Ms. Gullah-Ritchie.
I was a state rep for Dorchester and Roxbury some years ago. And so projects that are in those areas would be clearly on my radar screen. I think as mayor, I will want to look outside of that area. I'll say that I was helped by people on this panel in terms of getting projects through, including the former president of the city council, Charles Yancey. And I would hope to continue to work with you all and hope that I will be your mayor. But I'm going to look at East Boston. And I think East Boston is a very important community for all of us. East Boston may, in fact, get a casino. The jury's still out, as they say. But if that, in fact, happens, I'm going to be very much all over East Boston in terms of looking at all of the impacts that that casino will have on the neighborhood and on the residents there, and on the waterfront and all of that. So I will be a mayor for the entire city. I will certainly not forget my old district in Dorchester and Roxbury, but East Boston will be on my list of priorities.
That's great, thank you. And Councilor Ross, I'm going to be asking you the last question, so why don't you very quickly.
Sure. I mentioned the 17 acres on the waterfront, but I actually think the strongest development initiative isn't going to be development. I think it's going to be restaurant licenses in every neighborhood that can't be sold and just sent downtown. I actually think this might be the most transformative device in our city. Ayanna Presley's been talking a little bit about this as well. I think that if we bring places where people can gather, go on dates, work a second job, do what we do in restaurants, that can be transformative, and we've seen it across this city. I've certainly seen it in the neighborhood that I live in, Mission Hill. I actually think that little piece of legislation can be even more transformative than many of the projects we're even talking about here. Thank you.
Thank you. One neighborhood priority. I'll bring you back in next. Thank you. Quickly.
Vice President of Summit Design and Construction that's building the Ferdinand Building. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that would be most important to me personally, since I'm the one that carries the data on a regular basis, and I think Shawmut's doing a great job of making sure that we overachieve the requirements on residents, people of color, and women. But I do want to say that transit-oriented development is a really, really important part of the future of the city. And I do think that the casino issue is something that has to be revisited, and we need to be planning for the possibility that that doesn't pass, and what can that land be used for that creates jobs.
Okay, thank you. I thought it was the Casey overpass. What else?
Well, I said that before you asked the question.
Oh, I see.
Every neighborhood
Clever.
in the city has an Edison building or a telephone building that isn't being used anymore. We need to repurpose those buildings. They don't just represent space. They could represent jobs in our communities. And everyone mentioned some great places, and I think that's important. But I think we have to continue to grow industry in our communities so people have an opportunity to live there. And we also need to work on more workforce housing in our communities. Not low income necessarily, we need that as well, but we need workforce housing in our neighborhoods to keep people in our city.
That's great. Do people have the energy for one more question? Yes, will be brought in as soon as I ask the next question. So you can. Everybody's going to wrap up together.
Give everyone the same question.
Everybody is going to be wrapping up together. So do people have the energy? We're losing some audience here. So it's going to be very quick. And this is to Councilor Ross, and then I'll call on Councilor Yancey to answer the question, and all of the others that you would like to. I think we've been very fair to you. Thank you. Councilor Ross, the Boston Marathon tragedy brought home to me, and I think to many people, that the very things that we love about living in the city is exactly what makes us vulnerable. The crowds, the celebratory events, the sort of open society, the diversity of people, moving together, and yet, we need to be safe. So I don't think people are necessarily looking for Jersey barriers on the Boston Common, but and I, of course, want everybody's answer to this question, and whatever thoughts you have on this very serious question, how do we reconcile the need for safety and security with having a vibrant, open, urban lifestyle?
I mean, I guess I'd say this, Renee. A lot of public safety is almost counterintuitive. Police don't necessarily make us safer. Sometimes we make ourselves safer. I mean, think of a park that has police standing on every edge of it. That doesn't feel safe. But a park that has all of you recreating and playing and eating, and that makes people feel safe. Even with the tragedy in the Back Bay and the marathon bombing, it was the people who wound up having their smartphones and their iPhones and their ability to really do some kind of self-patrolling. I think, riots that don't happen in our city because our police are not wearing riot gear, but because they're wearing their regular soft-clothed uniform, that's this kind of counterintuitive way of approaching violence. We can't be the city that battens down the hatches with riot police. That's not us. We've proved that over and over again. We're a city that has to enable all of us to make our city safer together, from every crime watch to just every person who's out there in every possible corner of our street.
Thank you. Representative Walsh, you want to answer that?
Is this on? There you go. Thank you. And I agree with Councilor Ross on this. I think if cowards want to do harm, it's difficult to police that. And that's what happened on Marathon Monday. And I think the response that our first responders had, including our police, we had special tactical units there on the scene immediately. So they were patrolling the area. And I think it's very difficult for us. I think the one thing is, I don't think we should put barriers up. I don't think we should cage in our communities. I don't think we should do that. This is an open day. Marathon Monday was a very much open day of celebration until the tragedy that happened. And I think that, it's difficult to police that. And I think we as citizens in Boston, I think people are a little more cognizant of the fact now. And I think we just need to continue that. And it's a difficult topic to address, but we want to keep our civil liberties here in the city as well. We don't want to lock down into a community where we're afraid to go out.
Mr. Walzak.
Obviously, it's a big balancing act, and in other countries where there's fear of terror, there's usually a lot of cameras. If you look at London, if you saw the WGBH special on how New York handles this issue, I think we'll be winding up doing the same type of thing of having a lot more cameras around. Obviously, that's an infringement on First Amendment rights in some ways, but I think we're going to have to get used to it. I think we'll also wind up with more, especially next year, we'll wind up with people that are, have to go through some sort of gate in order to get into that area, and that may happen or may not happen. All I can say is that after 9/11, the first major kind of downtown event was the New Year's Eve fireworks along the Common. And I remember thinking, geez, is anybody really going to show up at this? And in fact, thousands of people showed up for it. And despite the fact that there were, fireworks and all that kind of stuff, people had a great time, and I think it really eased things. So I think Bostonians have a great resilience, and I think we'll wind up with a lot of people going down just to prove them wrong, that we are, in fact, very brave people and strong and all that. And I'm looking forward to that, but I also think that we're going to wind up with more, to teach ourselves more vigilance.
Thank you. Councilor Yancey, why don't you, just jumping out of your seat, go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, I did want to respond to the question about priority projects, and I'll do so by simply saying that transit-oriented development is critical to the future of the entire city of Boston. So the Fairmont line will be a key point of development all up and down that line, in addition to finishing up the development at the Boston State Hospital site. Many of you participated in the development of new housing. We have the Mass Biolab at that site, brand new, spanking new buildings that house many, many jobs. But to the extent that we can promote economic development where Boston residents benefit from the employment opportunities and new business opportunities, is to the extent to which the entire city grows. And Renee, I intend to be mayor of the entire city of Boston, and will speak up and advocate for the city, even if we're not on the 8-member panel. Thank you.
And how about the marathon question about security and
Well,
freedom?
that is critical. I happen to agree with those that say that Boston is a great city, in major part because of the resilience of the people. With that said, we do have to be smart in terms of planning these large-scale events, make sure that we take advantage of whatever intelligence we have. The Boston Police Department has a BRIC, which is an intelligence unit of the police department, and I would encourage the police department to work in even greater cooperation with the feds, the state, and more importantly with community residents. Because once that's done, I think we lessen the opportunity for that type of violence. And let me also add that there are people throughout the city of Boston who on a daily basis are fearful for violence even in their neighborhoods. And we have to address that issue. That's an ongoing issue that I believe is a solvable issue if we're willing to make the investment in time and in people, particularly developing some mentorship programs, maybe relying on many of our architects here to help build a new high school where we grow new architects with your help, and that would increase the level of hopefulness in areas of the city where too many young people suffer from hopelessness. We can do it. We have the people.
That's great. Thank you. Councilor Arroyo, I guess I'll ask you about the question of security and freedom and open society.
I take my cue here from our very able police commissioner Ed Davis in his testimony in Washington, D.C. One, he called for greater communication between all law enforcement agencies so that the information that one agency may have, another agency also has it. And in particular, what the FBI had prior that the Boston police would have had before and would have known has some sense of what they might be looking for, too. He did call for some more cameras, but he said, listen, what he said, we have to be careful because he's not calling for a camera on every pole in the city of Boston, and neither am I. I'm not asking for that. And I think we would all be surprised if we actually did a check to see how many cameras we have in our public spaces. Let us not forget that part of why we were able to identify the two bombing suspects was because of cameras that were already in place. Also, let me be clear, cameras do not stop crime. You are not safer because the camera's there. There's just a higher likelihood that if something happened, we'd be able to find out who did it. What I think creates safety is relationship between our police department and our communities and our residents, and making sure that people understand that they can speak to this officer, share information they have, that it's accessible and they can touch it. You only get that through real and honest community policing, on your bicycle, walking the beat. We have to also understand that violence does indeed happen in every day in our city. Just this weekend alone, in Eggleston Square, a young woman was killed in broad daylight. Just this weekend alone. We have to make sure that all of our neighborhoods have access to opportunities. We have to make sure that all of our young people know that they matter. And once they learn that they matter and they are loved, then they can begin to love someone else. We have to make sure that opportunities exist in our schools, in our employment, and in our workforce. And we do that by intention. It doesn't happen by accident. And we do that by knowing that every person is valuable, and we do that by knowing that every neighborhood is valuable. And then you legislate that way, and you lead that way.
Thank you.
That's what I think will lead to greater public safety here in
Great.
the city of Boston.
Thank you. Mr. Barros.
Thank you. So there's an indicator that some have reported on that's called social capital in cities. And with the increase of social capital in the city, there's a decrease typically of violence. That means there's an increase of people building relationships, that police building relationships with community, but also residents building relationships with residents and being vigilant and caring for the city of Boston. If we could ride the tail of Boston strong, and if residents can care for one another as if we were first responders today, as if we know that, in fact, that Boston needs you today, and as the leader of the city, you've got to call on that, because there are neighborhoods where people are scared of walking out of their homes. And Boston has to have an increase in social capital. As executive director of DSNI, what we did to fight crime, and when we were first formed, there were lots of hot spots. At that point, they used to map hot spots all the time, the police department, in our neighborhood. But one of the first things we did is called for eyes on the streets and people being aware of what was happening around them. And we built community. Folks building relationships with their neighbors and taking care of their neighbors. Today, there are 0 hot spots in the area that we worked in because we have a stronger community and a stronger sense of community. It has to be about relationships. It has to be a preventative way to do it. And frankly, this is not something new. All of the countries that are dealing with this and having success are saying this to the United States. Israel says this. The UK says this. It is about relationships, increased social capital, decreased crime, and the ability for terrorists to strike.
Thank you. Nicely done.
Yep. So in terms of the marathon, listen, I think our freedom and our open society is our greatest strength. So the last thing I would ever want to see are drones flying above the sky of Boston or anything along those lines. If you want a practical, piece to security, we could make a bigger investment in bomb-sniffing dogs, and these are the Labradors who are more friendly, and they can help with the big events. And the great piece when they're not active is they can be deployed to crime scenes to help with tackling the issues we face around drugs and gang violence. But fundamentally, I want us to be a free, open Boston, and it's what makes us strong and what will continue to make us strong. So I don't want to see us become a police state as an answer to security overall. Are we going to get a closing statement?
No, thank you.
So I have to.
Oh, you have to make it so quick.
I'll make it so quick. I have to run out because I'm meeting a group of Boston Public School parents to announce that this proposal around offering large-scale developments, fast-track permitting,
Right.
in exchange for them helping with our school construction. I think this could be a pilot on looking at fast-track permitting across the city and how we can do this in a principled way to balance community interest with the need to break through the red tape and bring more transparency to our development process. I thank you for giving us this opportunity this morning. Greatly appreciate it. We need bold leadership in City Hall, and
Okay.
I hope that you'll consider me. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Councilor
Jane.
Consalvo.
Again,
Two more, and then everybody can eat.
Just to answer the question that was asked.
Thank you.
We will continue to have open public events in our city, period. That's what makes our city great. We're the strongest, best city in the world. And we're the cradle of liberty and the bastion of freedom. It all started here. So we will continue to have public open events like the marathon, hopefully World Series, NBA and NHL championship parades and things of that nature. And at the same time, though, the next mayor is going to have to take realistic approaches to making sure we're keeping everybody safe. That's the fact. The fact is we're going to have to manage those events, manage that freedom, and manage those large-scale events so we can have safe events and keep our public safe. So we're going to do that by, as has been said, a couple of things, investing in our police and community relations, making sure the public feels comfortable with the police to turn over and share information like cell phone data, like phone records, and other things like that. That trust between regular citizens and the police is paramount because that's how we get information. It also has been said, and I agree with the commissioner, a greater sharing and a greater coordination of information between the Boston Police, the state police, and our federal partners at Homeland Security and the FBI. Critical. We have to have a better coordination and a better sharing of information that allows us to actually utilize information and intelligence to prevent incidents from happening. It's also an investment in new technologies. I've been a huge supporter on the City Council of new technologies to help our Boston Police do their job, and fire and EMS do their job stronger, better, more efficiently. We need to be investing in the latest technology that gives the police their tools to protect the public, but also at the same time keep us open and free. There is a balance, and we can do it. And we need to be taking that technology. And then finally, a continued investment in the forces that oversee this public safety. That means, as mayor, continuing to invest in personnel, police, fire, and EMS. Our first responders who were on the scene, who saved lives, who coordinated the response for the emergency evacuations, and who really were the ones that drove the aftermath and making sure people actually lives were saved. We need a continued investment in police, fire, and EMS, in their equipment and in personnel that will help coordinate and be a part of the solution to those issues.
Great, thank you. Ms. Gullah-Ritchie, bring us home.
Okay, Renee, thank you for facilitating this discussion. Thank you, Boston Society of Architects, and all of you listening so attentively to our responses and to these issues. There are twin concerns that we are focused on right here with this issue, which is one is going to be a citywide concern of the desire to preserve our freedom and to continue these wonderful celebrations that make us proud and that unite us as a citizenry. So that's going to be a priority, obviously. And then matching those twin concerns with the notion that there are some individual concerns of neighborhoods and residents who have for far too long been subjected to very difficult circumstances with gun violence and gang activity and all of that. And so as mayor, I'm going to tackle both of these. We are not going to be the city that we are if we are unsafe and we're worried about terrorism. We also need to be a stronger city by caring about every neighborhood of our city, and I think we can do that, and I think we showed that we can do that around this marathon bombing incident. I mean, that was a disaster. We were all glued to our TV sets. We felt our hearts drop. We felt for our children. My own daughter was out there at the marathon, and when somebody said that a bomb went off and then a second one, I panicked. I was at work, and I know we felt that. Even with strangers, people we didn't know, we felt that was, it tugged at our heartstrings. The silver lining, if I may say, was that we all came together, rock solid, for this city. And I think we can do that again, and I think we can have a better planning process. Admittedly, I think all of us understanding the world we live in is going to require improved communication and coordination with everyone at all levels, city, state, and the federal government. And we'll do this prior to every event so that we can do all that we can to prevent these incidents from happening in the first place.
So, thank you very much. I want to thank the candidates for this amazing opportunity to hear their